your son, but will it even work properly?" These were the words of a blonde U.S. military instructor, looking down at a petite Asian man in a swimsuit amidst the humid air of an indoor pool. "Especially Japanese men are all like that. They're so weak," he declared, and the loud laughter of the muscular Navy SEALs around him echoed off the tiled walls. The petite man said nothing. Only his gaze was as deep and calm as the pool water. 20 minutes later, the arrogant female instructor was struggling and screaming in the water, "Help me! Help me, please!" Meanwhile, the Asian man, whom she had dismissed as small, remained calmly floating on the water as if he were the master of the sea. All the Navy SEALs were speechless with shock. It was the most unbelievable sight they had ever witnessed. What on earth had happened? Everyone, please click the subscribe button just a little. Today, an unbelievable story awaits you. It was the Navy SEAL Training Center in the mid-2000s. At precisely 6 a.m., an old taxi stopped in front of a huge indoor swimming pool building. The door opened, and a man in plain black training wear stepped out. He was an Asian man, about 168 centimeters tall, thin, with a quiet impression, 29 years old, named Kimura Shunsuke. In his hand, he held only an old black bag. Looking up at the sign that read, "United States Navy Special Warfare Underwater Training Center," his figure was like that of an ordinary citizen visiting a public pool. The guards looked him up and down, and a dismissive smile crept onto their faces. He was too shabbily dressed to be an exchange trainee participating in a joint U.S.-Japan special training program. Entering the building, Shunsuke was confronted by a massive indoor pool. It was a giant pool, twice the size of an Olympic pool, with a depth of 5 meters. Already, over 30 U.S. military personnel in wetsuits were warming up. They were all men over 180 meters tall, black trainees whose muscles strained their swimsuits, blonde-haired, blue-eyed white trainees. Shunsuke, walking among them, looked like a boy lost among giants. After changing into his swimsuit and emerging, Shunsuke's lean but toned body was revealed. However, compared to the giant U.S. soldiers around him, he still looked shabby. Mike Johnson, a black trainee over 190 centimeters tall, spotted Shunsuke. He had a muscular physique that seemed to be at least 130 centimeters around the chest. The words Navy SEALs were clearly visible on his chest. "Hey, shorty, this is a playground for adults." Shunsuke calmly raised his face and looked at him. He was more than 20 centimeters shorter than Mike. White trainees on either side also gathered, all eyes focused on Shunsuke, like they were watching a monkey in a zoo. Brad Smith, a white trainee standing 185 centimeters tall, circled Shunsuke and laughed. Hearing he was an exchange trainee from Japan made him even more astonished. Is this really the Japanese Special Forces? Laughter spread among the Navy SEALs, a laughter of disbelief. Just then, a blonde, blue-eyed woman approached. It was Jessica Wilson, a 25-year-old U.S. military instructor. She had a toned body of 175 centimeters. As soon as she saw Shunsuke, she let out a snort of laughter. Jessica stood in front of Shunsuke and looked down at him. Even as a woman, she was taller than Shunsuke. "You're really cute," she said, patting Shunsuke on the shoulder like petting a puppy. "Asian men are so small." The surrounding trainees burst into laughter. Shunsuke stood silently. Only his hands slowly clenched into fists. Jessica moved closer, a teasing smile on her face. Is this the extent of Japanese Special Forces compared to our Navy SEALs? She looked Shunsuke up and down again. Comparing us is an insult in itself, Mike interjected. Yeah, our Navy SEALs female instructor is more competitive than him. Laughter erupted, but Shunsuke remained silent, as if in the depths of the sea. Jessica touched Shunsuke's slender arm. times like these. Her gaze roamed his entire body. Then she uttered the most insulting words. "If you can beat me, I'll get pregnant for you. But will it even work?" The pool fell silent. All the trainees held their breath. She had crossed a line, but Shunsuke still said nothing. Only his gaze deepened slightly. Jessica continued to provoke him. "In Japan, they say small peppers are spicy, right?" Just then, a whistle sounded from a distance. Colonel Dave Rogers' powerful voice boomed across the pool. Colonel Rogers, a veteran soldier in his early 50s, gathered all the trainees. All the trainees lined up on the edge of the pool. Shunsuke stood at the front of the line. The height difference between him and the other trainees was glaring. It was like a middle schooler mixed in with adults. Colonel Rogers looked at Shunsuke and was surprised. He seemed too small to be an exchange trainee from Japan. "Your name is Kimura Shunsuke. Do you speak English?" His pronunciation was a little hesitant. Colonel Rogers' brow furrowed. Jessica whispered to the colonel, "Colonel, he doesn't seem to speak English properly. Will joint training be possible?" Colonel Rogers also looked troubled, but the program had already begun. "Let's try it for now." The first training was a basic swimming endurance test. It involved swimming continuously for 30 minutes. It was the fundamental of fundamentals for the Navy SEALs. All the trainees stood on the edge of the pool. Shunsuke was among them. Giant U.S. soldiers on both sides, and a single small Asian man in the middle. Jessica sneered at Shunsuke. "He won't last 10 minutes. With the sound of the whistle, all the trainees dived into the water. A huge splash erupted, but something strange happened. Underwater, Shunsuke was a completely different person. He swam calmly, steadily, as naturally as a fish. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes passed. Even after 15 minutes, Shunsuke was still swimming diligently. He showed no signs of exertion. Meanwhile, the large U.S. trainees began to tire, clinging to the edge of the pool one by one. No matter how big their muscles were, their endurance was a different matter. After 25 minutes, only Shunsuke and a few veteran trainees were still swimming in the pool. Jessica's face hardened. Shunsuke, whom she expected to retire in minutes, was actually swimming the most stably. At the 30-minute mark, only Shunsuke, Mike, and 2 veteran instructors remained. But even they were breathing heavily, and their movements were becoming erratic. Shunsuke, on the other hand, was swimming at the same rhythm as when he started, as if he had just begun. Colonel Rogers' gaze sharpened. Something was unusual, but Jessica remained displeased. What difference does it make if he's a little good at swimming? The important thing is something else. She was already looking forward to seeing how pathetic Shunsuke would look in the real underwater combat training that would begin tomorrow. But she didn't know yet what lay hidden in Shunsuke's gaze as he looked out at the sea. That night, Shunsuke lay alone in his bunk. All the other U.S. trainees were gathered together, drinking beer and making noise, but he was not invited. Or rather, no one even paid attention to his existence. He was like an invisible man. The next morning, at 7 a.m., the real underwater combat training began. Colonel Rogers assembled all the trainees in front of the pool. Today's training was to hold one's breath underwater for 5 minutes while striking targets. It was one of the core skills of the Navy SEALs. Today, the real training begins. Colonel Rogers' stern voice echoed. Jessica stepped forward. She was in charge of today's training. Her title as a specialist instructor in underwater combat suited her imposing presence. There are targets underwater. Hold your breath, dive, strike the target accurately, and come back up. Her gaze fell on Shunsuke. If you can't do it, you can go first. The surrounding trainees began to laugh. Shunsuke remained silent. Mike was the first to go. The large black trainee dived into the water. It took him 3 minutes and 10 seconds to dive to a depth of 4 meters, strike the target, and resurface. Excellent, Jessica applauded. The second was Brad. The white trainee also skillfully completed the mission. His record was also 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Trainees took turns challenging the task. Everyone showed their excellent skills as Navy SEALs. They completed the mission within an average of 4 minutes. It was Shunsuke's turn. Well, it's time for our special guest. Jessica's voice held sarcasm. You're not afraid of water, are you? The surrounding trainees chuckled. Shunsuke stood on the edge of the pool. His small stature made him look even shabbier. Jessica continued to provoke him. I heard Asian people have small lung capacity, is that true? You probably won't last a minute, Mike interjected. Shunsuke looked down at the water. The deep blue water awaited him, as if embracing him. He took a quiet, deep breath. 1, 2, 3. Then he dived into the water. A splash erupted. But after Shunsuke entered, the water became unusually calm. Shunsuke disappeared beneath the surface. Everyone began to measure the time, watching their stopwatches. 1 minute passed. Shunsuke was still not visible. 2 minutes passed. It was still quiet. 3 minutes passed. Doubt began to appear on Jessica's face. Hey, what is he doing? 4 minutes passed. Other Navy SEALs also started to stir. Did something happen to him underwater? 5 minutes passed. Now everyone had a serious expression. Even for a Navy SEAL, staying underwater for 5 minutes was not easy. Shouldn't we rescue him? Brad was about to dive in when... Splash! Shunsuke's head quietly emerged from the water. He rose as naturally as a submarine surfacing. His expression showed no signs of breathlessness. He swam to the edge of the pool. His breathing was not at all rough. Finished, Shunsuke's quiet voice said. Colonel Rogers checked his stopwatch. It was 7 minutes and 30 seconds, nearly twice as long as the other trainees. When they checked the underwater camera, an even more astonishing fact was revealed. After striking the target, Shunsuke had been swimming leisurely underwater, as if taking a stroll. Jessica's face paled. She clearly felt something was wrong. Do it again, she challenged. Maybe you just got lucky, right? Shunsuke nodded. It was the second attempt. This time, everyone watched with even greater concentration. Shunsuke entered the water again. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Time flowed by. This time, Shunsuke surfaced only after 8 minutes had passed. He was still breathing perfectly calmly. In fact, he looked even more relaxed than after the shorter duration. The area around the pool fell silent. All the trainees stared at Shunsuke in disbelief. Mike grumbled, "What the hell is he?" Jessica also had a troubled expression, but she quickly shook her head. Well, what difference does it make if he's a little good at diving? The real combat is completely different. She continued to underestimate Shunsuke. She believed that endurance underwater and actual combat effectiveness were separate. But the gazes of the other trainees began to change. Clearly, something was not normal. Colonel Rogers also looked at Shunsuke with a serious expression. He had been a Navy SEAL for 30 years and had never seen such diving ability. Team member Kimura, did you learn diving somewhere? In the sea, Shunsuke replied briefly. Which sea? The Sea of Japan. There was no further explanation. Shunsuke still did not talk much about himself. Jessica muttered discontentedly. Is the Japanese sea something special? She still underestimated Shunsuke, but a seed of anxiety was growing in her heart. At lunchtime, Shunsuke sat alone in the mess hall. The other trainees seemed to be avoiding him, sensing something was off. Jessica approached Shunsuke with a few trainees. "Hey, Shorty, you seem to be a little good at diving. But what's really important is practical application. Real combat training starts tomorrow." Shunsuke nodded quietly. "Do you think you can do it tomorrow like you did today?" Jessica's challenging gaze. She still believed it was just luck, but Shunsuke's gaze remained calm, like the depths of the sea. That night, Shunsuke lay alone in his bunk again. He gazed out at the sea from the window, deep in thought. A real test awaited him tomorrow, but he felt no fear. Rather, he seemed to be looking forward to it, as if returning home after a long absence. The next morning, at 5 a.m., Shunsuke woke up earlier than the other trainees and gazed at the pool. The morning sun shone on the calm water. "You're up early." A voice from behind made Shunsuke turn. It was Colonel Rogers. "I couldn't sleep. Are you nervous?" Shunsuke shook his head. "No, I just like the water." Colonel Rogers looked puzzled. "Liking the water? That's an unusual expression." At 7 a.m., all the trainees gathered. Today was armed underwater combat training. It was a simulation of actual combat. Jessica stepped forward, her face filled with confidence. "Today, we'll do some real Navy SEAL training." She glanced at Shunsuke. "We'll be doing knife fighting underwater. The goal is to subdue or neutralize your opponent." The surrounding trainees buzzed. Armed underwater combat was an advanced skill even among Navy SEALs. They would pair up and compete one-on-one. Jessica's gaze was fixed on Shunsuke. "Kimura, Shunsuke, you'll show me your skills." The pool area fell silent. Jessica had volunteered. "Jessica, are you sure?" Mike said worriedly. "He was a little strange yesterday." "What's strange about it?" "Just because he stayed underwater a little longer." Jessica scoffed. "Practical combat is completely different. Have you ever fought underwater?" She still underestimated Shunsuke. It was absurd to compare herself, a specialist instructor, to an amateur. The two put on combat gear over their swimsuits, underwater knives and defensive equipment. Jessica's physique was truly impressive. A 175 centimeter tall, muscular body. The abs and shoulder muscles revealed through her swimsuit indicated her professionalism. Shunsuke, on the other hand, still looked small. His figure seemed even shabbier with the gear on. "Well, are you ready?" Jessica asked provocatively. "If you're scared, you can give up." Shunsuke quietly shook his head. The two entered the pool. The depth was 3 meters, deep enough. At Colonel Rogers' signal, they both dived underwater. Jessica immediately went on the offensive. The basic principle of underwater combat was swift subdual. She lunged at Shunsuke, but something strange happened. Shunsuke evaded Jessica's attack as if he were a fish. He moved naturally with the water flow, without using any force. Jessica attacked again, this time with faster, more precise movements. But Shunsuke was no longer there. He disappeared as if dissolving into the water, reappearing in another spot. The trainees watching from the poolside began to murmur. "What is that movement? Can you move like that underwater?" Jessica became increasingly confused. She had engaged in underwater combat with dozens of Navy SEALs, but she had never encountered an opponent like this. She attacked more fiercely, but she couldn't even touch him. Shunsuke seemed to read all of Jessica's movements, moving freely and at will, as if born in the water. 2 minutes passed. Jessica's breathing began to become ragged. 3 minutes passed. Her movements slowed down. Shunsuke, on the other hand, was still at ease, showing no signs of fatigue. After 4 minutes, Jessica surfaced, gasping for air and clinging to the edge of the pool. "Just a break," she panted. However, Shunsuke was still in the water, with no intention of surfacing. 5 more minutes passed before Shunsuke quietly completely silent. Colonel Rogers was speechless. In his 30 years as a Navy SEAL, he had never seen such underwater capabilities. Mike grumbled, "Is he even human?" The other trainees also looked on in disbelief. Jessica, the specialist instructor, had been completely overwhelmed. Jessica, panting at the poolside, stared at Shunsuke. Her pride had been severely wounded. "Let's do it again," she yelled, forcing herself to stand. "I haven't really done it properly yet." But Colonel Rogers stopped her. "That's enough. We'll stop here for today." Jessica's face turned red with frustration and shame. Her pride as a specialist instructor had completely crumbled. "What the hell is he?" Brad asked quietly. Shunsuke got out of the water and quietly put away his gear. He still said nothing. Colonel Rogers approached Shunsuke. "Team member Kimura, where did you learn such skills?" "In the sea," was Shunsuke's brief reply. Specifically, where? "In the sea." There was no further explanation. At lunchtime, the atmosphere in the mess hall had completely changed. The trainees now looked at Shunsuke differently, with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Jessica sat alone in a corner, her pride wounded. Mike cautiously approached Shunsuke. "So, are you really Japanese?" Shunsuke nodded. "So, do you have places in Japan where you train like that?" Shunsuke's response was vague. Whispers continued among the trainees. Clearly, something was not normal, but Shunsuke's true identity remained veiled. He still didn't say much about himself. One thing was certain, they could no longer ignore him. That night, Jessica came to the pool alone. She was training alone to restore her pride, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't understand the movements Shunsuke had shown. "What's different?" she muttered. Just then, quiet footsteps could be heard from behind. It was Shunsuke, still practicing. Shunsuke's quiet voice. Jessica turned around. There was no trace of resentment or victory on his face, only peace. "Who are you, really?" Jessica asked directly. Shunsuke hesitated for a moment, then replied quietly, "I'm just someone who likes the sea." It was still an enigmatic answer, but a bigger test awaited him tomorrow. What would Shunsuke look like in a situation similar to actual combat? A month passed. During that time, rumors about Shunsuke spread throughout the training center. That small guy from Japan turns into someone else entirely in the water. He completely overwhelmed Instructor Jessica, but still, no one knew Shunsuke's true identity. He remained quiet and didn't say much about himself. Today was a special day. It was the day the practical simulation training would begin. At 6 a.m., all the trainees gathered in full combat gear, equipped as if for a real operation. Colonel Rogers stood at the front with a stern expression. "For the next 3 days, we will conduct practical simulations. The scenario is that virtual terrorists have occupied a facility. You will form teams, infiltrate, rescue hostages, and recapture the facility." All the trainees' expressions turned serious. This was not just a drill. It was exactly like a real Navy SEAL mission. Colonel Rogers began reading the list of teams. Alpha Team, Mike, Brad, Thompson, composed of veteran Navy SEALs. Bravo Team, Jessica, Rodriguez, also skilled trainees. And Charlie Team, Kimura Shunsuke, alone. Understanding dawned on Shunsuke. Alone. In a team training, he was to do it by himself. Doubts arose among the trainees. Jessica stepped forward. "Colonel, isn't that too unfair? To pit one person against a whole team?" Colonel Rogers interrupted her. "If team member Kimura wishes, he can join a team." All eyes focused on Shunsuke. Shunsuke quietly shook his head. "It's fine. I'll do it alone." Murmurs intensified. Is he crazy? Even if he's good underwater? but Shunsuke's expression remained calm. At 1 p.m., the practical simulation began. It was a huge artificial structure set up at the venue, a training facility built exactly like a real facility platform. Alpha Team and Bravo Team departed on speedboats, elite units of 6 fully armed men each. Shunsuke, on the other hand, was alone. He was given only basic underwater gear and minimal weapons. "Are you really going to do it alone?" Mike confirmed one last time. Shunsuke nodded. "Operation start." At the colonel's signal, the 3 teams moved out simultaneously. Alpha Team and Bravo Team approached the structure with brilliant tactics. The roar of the speedboat engines echoed across the sea. But Shunsuke was nowhere to be seen. No one knew where he had gone. 10 minutes passed. Alpha Team began infiltration from the east side of the structure. Bravo Team was approaching from the west, but Shunsuke was still nowhere to be seen. 20 minutes passed. The 2 teams began intense engagement. Though simulated, the tension was as real as in actual combat. Just then, "Hey, wait, what is this?" Colonel Rogers, observing from the control room, exclaimed in surprise. It was footage from an underwater camera. Something was moving in the deep part of the structure's base. It was Shunsuke. He was slowly infiltrating at a depth of 10 meters, the deepest part of the structure. It was a move no one had anticipated. "How is he breathing from there?" a technician asked in surprise. But Shunsuke seemed to have no problem, moving freely as if he were a fish. 30 minutes passed. While Alpha Team and Bravo Team were still fighting fiercely, an alarm suddenly blared inside the structure. "What is it? What's happening?" "Someone has infiltrated the central computer room." The control room erupted in chaos. Checking the cameras, an unbelievable sight unfolded. Shunsuke had already reached the core of the structure, and he was completely dry, without a single drop of water. How did he get there? He should still be wet. Everyone was astonished. 40 minutes later, the simulation ended. The results were shocking. Alpha Team and Bravo Team were still engaged in combat outside the structure, unable to even infiltrate properly. Shunsuke, on the other hand, had already rescued all the hostages and neutralized all the virtual terrorists. Alone, Colonel Rogers was speechless. In his 30 years as a Navy SEAL, he had never seen anything like this. How was this possible? Jessica was completely shocked. Shunsuke had accomplished what they couldn't achieve, even as a team. At dinner, all the trainees surrounded Shunsuke. No longer was it scorn, but genuine curiosity. "So, how did you do it?" Mike asked. Shunsuke replied quietly, "I entered through the water channels." "Water channels? There are water channels beneath the structure. If you follow them, you can enter." Brad shook his head. "But the water depth was 10 meters. How did you breathe?" Shunsuke hesitated for a moment. "I held my breath for over 10 minutes. Everyone looked on in disbelief. Just then, Jessica spoke. "Are you really just an ordinary Japanese person?" Shunsuke looked at her, hesitating for the first time. "I am just someone who grew up in the sea." It was still an enigmatic answer, but one thing was clear. Shunsuke was a being different from anyone they had ever seen. That night, Colonel Rogers looked at Shunsuke's profile alone in his office again. But there was only ordinary information. No special background, no records of special training. "Who is he?" the colonel muttered. A bigger test awaited him tomorrow. Would Shunsuke's identity be revealed? It was the final day of training. Over these 4 days, Shunsuke had consistently shown astonishing results. From underwater infiltration, hostage rescue, to bomb disposal, he had outperformed Navy SEAL veterans in every field. Now, all the trainees looked at Shunsuke with completely changed eyes. Point training has ended." His voice was solemn. To be honest, this training was a great shock to us. The colonel's gaze fell on Shunsuke, especially team member Kimura Shunsuke's abilities. He paused. They were the highest level we have ever seen. The surrounding trainees nodded. It was an undeniable fact. Team member Kimura, one last question, Colonel Rogers said with a serious expression. "Who are you really?" All eyes focused on Shunsuke. It was the question they had pondered for a month. Shunsuke was silent for a moment, then slowly opened his mouth. "I belong to the Special Security Unit, SBU, of the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force." The room fell silent. "Special Security Unit," Mike repeated. "Also known as SBU, Shunsuke explained calmly, meaning Underwater Demolition Unit. Brad asked in surprise, "Does Japan have such a unit?" "Yes, it was founded in 1953. Colonel Rogers' face paled. He had heard of the SBU. "You are the real SBU?" "Yes, 12 years underwater." All the trainees were shocked. Shunsuke, whom they had thought was an ordinary person, was actually a member of Japan's elite special forces. Jessica asked with a trembling voice, "Then you were deceiving us from the beginning?" Shunsuke shook his head. "I wasn't deceiving you. I just didn't say it." "Why didn't you ask?" Everyone was lost for words. In fact, they had ignored Shunsuke from the start. They had never seriously wanted to know his true identity. Mike said with a bewildered expression, "So all the training we did was easy for you?" "No, I learned a lot," Shunsuke replied humbly. "Especially the Navy SEALs' tactics were truly wonderful." But no one believed his words. The skill Shunsuke had shown was far superior to theirs. Colonel Rogers asked in more detail, "What kind of missions does the SBU primarily handle?" "Underwater infiltration, reconnaissance, and enemy territory infiltration missions." "Enemy territory infiltration?" "Yes. Missions to infiltrate North Korea or other enemy territories." All the trainees' faces turned even paler. That was one of the most dangerous missions, even for the Navy SEALs. Brad asked cautiously, "Have you actually carried out such missions?" Shunsuke hesitated slightly. "A few times." "Where?" "I cannot say." It was a military secret, but that brief answer was enough. Mike said in disbelief, "So you have real combat experience?" "Yes." "How much?" "About 7 years." Everyone fell silent. 7 years of combat experience. That was more experience than most Navy SEALs. Mike asked with a trembling voice, "So, we were okay for a month?" "Yes," Shunsuke said calmly. "I was also disappointed with all of you at first." Everyone looked up. "But while training, I learned why the Navy SEALs are the strongest in the world." These were Shunsuke's heartfelt words. Especially teamwork and combat operations were truly valuable learning points. Colonel Rogers said with a complex expression, "So, is your superiority to us only in underwater capabilities?" Shunsuke thought for a moment. "Well, the environment is different." "What do you mean?" "The seas of Japan are different from those of America. They are colder and rougher." His explanation continued. "I think I naturally adapted because I trained in such an environment for 12 years. Jessica muttered, 12 years. She had only been a Navy SEAL instructor for 3 years. Brad asked with interest, "How does the Japanese SBU compare to the Navy SEALs?" Shunsuke replied cautiously, "It's difficult to compare. Each has different strengths. Specifically, the Navy SEALs excel in equipment and firepower. The SBU relies more on individual ability." Mike nodded as if he understood. "So that's why you could do all that alone?" "Yes. We mainly carry out missions alone or in small groups." Everything was explained. Astonishing individual ability, overwhelming an entire team alone, and superhuman underwater capabilities. He was a warrior on a different level from them from the beginning. Colonel Rogers said sincerely, "Team member Kimura, thank you very much. We learned a lot." Shunsuke bowed his head. "Thank you too." But only Jessica had a complex expression. She realized how arrogant she had been for the past month. That night, all the trainees held a farewell party for Shunsuke. Now they genuinely admired and respected him, but Shunsuke remained humble. "I learned a lot from all of you." Mike laughed. "What did we teach you?" "I learned about teamwork, that working together can sometimes be stronger than working alone." Everyone was moved, but only Jessica's heart was unsettled. All the insulting things she had said over the month flashed through her mind, especially the words she had said on the first day. "What if I bore your son?" The thought that she had said that to the elite special forces of Japan was too embarrassing. But a bigger twist awaited. There was an even more astonishing truth that Shunsuke had not yet revealed. In the middle of the farewell party, all the Navy SEALs gathered around Shunsuke, drinking beer and talking. The atmosphere had completely changed. The same people who had ignored Shunsuke a month ago now genuinely respected him. But only Jessica sat alone in a corner of the venue. She held a beer can, but she couldn't take a single sip. Everything she had said and done over the month replayed in her mind, especially the insulting words she had spoken on the first day. Shunsuke approached Jessica. A can of cola was in his hand. He didn't seem to be drinking alcohol. "Why are you sitting alone?" Shunsuke's quiet voice. Jessica looked up. There was no resentment or anger on his face, only a concerned expression. "I'm sorry," Jessica said in a small voice. "For what?" "For what I said at first." Shunsuke shook his head. "Don't worry about it. I understand." Tears welled up in Jessica's eyes. She realized how arrogant and foolish she had been. "I said such things without even knowing who you were." "It's okay, I told you." Shunsuke's voice was sincere. "Actually, I was angry at first too, but I tried to understand." "Understand what?" "That you all had pride in being Navy SEALs." Jessica nodded. "That's right. I also have pride in the SBU, so I understand how you felt." Just then, Colonel Rogers approached. His expression was serious. "Team member Kimura, can we talk for a moment?" Shunsuke and the colonel moved to a quiet place. Jessica followed. "Actually, I've confirmed something." Colonel Rogers' voice lowered. "About Japan's SBU." Shunsuke's expression stiffened slightly. "I also confirmed information about you." The colonel took out several documents. They looked like classified documents. "Kimura Shunsuke, one of the top agents in Japan's SBU." Shunsuke said nothing. "Especially your overseas deployment record is impressive." Colonel Rogers continued, flipping through the documents. "Afghanistan, Somalia, Iraq. It says you've conducted joint operations with the U.S. military several times." Jessica was surprised. "I didn't know Japan dispatched troops that far." "Not only that," the colonel's voice grew more serious. "It says you can speak French, Arabic, and even Russian." Shunsuke remained silent, and most surprisingly, Colonel Rogers turned to the last page. "This is a list of medals you've received from the Japanese government." The document listed a long string of medal names: Special Defense Medal, First Class Defense Medal, Second Class Defense Medal. The colonel read them one by one. "Do you know what this means?" Jessica looked puzzled. "It means you are Japan's greatest hero," Colonel Rogers explained. "To receive medals like these, you must have fought for your country, risking your life." Jessica's face turned pale. The person she had underestimated for a month was such a figure. There's something even more surprising. The colonel took out another document. success rate of hostage rescue operations in the Pacific region in the last 5 years, 100%, meaning not a single failure. Colonel Rogers also looked surprised. Even the Navy SEALs are not at this level. Shunsuke finally spoke. It was just luck. Luck, the colonel scoffed. 10 years of luck, Jessica asked with a trembling voice. Then are you really? I am just someone who likes the sea. Shunsuke's still humble answer. But now, the meaning of those words was different. He didn't just like the sea. The sea was his home. Colonel Rogers said sincerely, Team member Kimura, it was a true honor to be able to train with someone like you. The party venue was still noisy with the other trainees. They still didn't know Shunsuke's true identity. But Jessica knew. She knew what kind of person she had insulted and humiliated for a month. A Japanese hero, a true warrior who defended his country with his life, and a true professional who endured all the insults silently. I was truly an idiot, Jessica muttered. Shunsuke looked at her. No, you were just trying to protect the pride of the Navy SEALs. But I also learned something. I learned what true strength is. Shunsuke's heartfelt words. That working together is more important than being strong alone. The party continued late into the night, but only Jessica was lost in thought. Tomorrow, Shunsuke would return to Japan, and she would have to live with this shame forever. But one more astonishing truth remained. The real reason Shunsuke participated in this training. The next morning, Shunsuke's departure preparations were in full swing. It was the last moment before heading to the airport. All the Navy SEALs came out to see him off. The atmosphere was completely different from a month ago. Now, their eyes were filled with respect and reluctance to part. Colonel Rogers approached Shunsuke. He held another document in his hand. It was the result of contacting the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force headquarters overnight. There's one last thing I want to confirm before you leave. Shunsuke's expression stiffened slightly. He seemed to anticipate something. Colonel Rogers opened the document and began to read the astonishing truth. It was the real reason Shunsuke participated in this training. It was a hearing regarding the hostage rescue operation in January last year, which ended in failure due to Mela's intervention. Despite the operation's success, Shunsuke disobeyed his superior's withdrawal order and re-entered the site alone. The reason was simple. There were young children among the hostages who had not been rescued. The result was perfect. All 12 civilians were rescued, and there were no casualties. But the military prioritized orders over outcomes. Disobeying orders was insubordination. What's more surprising is that this wasn't the first or second time. Last year alone, there were 3 such instances of taking independent action, all to rescue civilians, especially young children. His superiors judged that Shunsuke was too emotional. The evaluation was that he prioritized human emotion over calm judgment. The intention was for him to learn a more systematic and disciplined way of thinking through joint training with the U.S. military. In other words, for Shunsuke, this training was a punishment, not an honor. The surrounding trainees were shocked to learn this fact. Jessica's face turned pale. The person she had ignored and insulted for a month was a true hero who risked his life and even broke orders to save young children. Shunsuke kept his head down while all these facts were revealed, as if he were ashamed. But he wasn't ashamed of disobeying orders. He was ashamed that his actions had caused trouble for his unit. Colonel Rogers asked Shunsuke if he was disgraced. Shunsuke's answer was firm. Not at all. He said that if the same situation arose again, he would do the same thing. At that moment, everyone understood. This was the spirit of a true soldier. This was the heart of a true hero. Orders and discipline are important, but more important is human life. who did what he had to do. He confessed that he had learned the importance of teamwork through this training, realizing that working together is stronger than working alone. Colonel Rogers said frankly that Shunsuke's arrival was not a punishment, but a blessing. They were the ones who learned more. He said Shunsuke had shown them what a true soldier and true courage are. The other trainees agreed. They had only had pride in being Navy SEALs, but now they understood what true pride was. As the departure time for the airport approached, Shunsuke stood up with his bag, and all the trainees surrounded him. It was a completely different scene from a month ago. Now, their eyes were filled with respect and regret. Jessica offered a heartfelt apology one last time. Shunsuke, on the other hand, expressed gratitude. He said she had made him stronger. He admitted that he was angry at first, but by enduring it, he realized what true strength was. The sea connects all places, were Shunsuke's final words as he left the training center. After Shunsuke left, the training center fell silent. But something had changed in everyone's hearts. They had learned what a true hero is and what true strength is. They now understood that the smallest person can be the greatest, the quietest person can be the strongest, and that a true hero is not someone who is flashy, but someone who silently does what they must. A week passed after Shunsuke's departure. The Navy SEAL Training Center outwardly returned to its routine. New trainees arrived, and existing members continued their routines. But everything had changed. Jessica was no longer as arrogant as before. When interacting with new trainees, she no longer made hasty judgments. She vowed never to judge people solely by their appearance. She paid extra attention to exchange trainees from foreign countries, making an effort to understand their true selves, even if their language was poor or they appeared small. Mike and Brad were the same. They still had pride in being Navy SEALs, but they realized it should not be a reason to disregard others. They learned that true strength comes not from belittling others, but from mutual respect and a willingness to learn. Colonel Rogers hung a photo of Shunsuke on his office wall. It was a group photo taken on the last day of training. The small Asian man standing in the center no longer looked out of place. In fact, he looked the most natural. He often told new trainees Shunsuke's story, using it as a living educational material to demonstrate true leadership and true courage. Size doesn't matter. What matters is the size of one's heart, became the colonel's oft-repeated words. Meanwhile, what about Shunsuke back in Japan? He returned to his unit and participated in routine training again. The month in America felt like a dream. His superiors asked him about his training experiences. Shunsuke replied simply that he had learned a lot, especially realizing the importance of teamwork. But a truly significant change had occurred elsewhere. His colleagues' gaze towards him had changed. His month of training with the American Navy SEALs had become a great asset. Most importantly, Shunsuke himself had changed. He was previously accustomed to working alone, but now he actively participated in training with his colleagues. He even shared the team tactics he had learned in America with his colleagues, realizing that sharing what he had learned was true learning. A few months later, Shunsuke received special news. An official letter of appreciation arrived from the U.S. Navy SEAL headquarters. It was a letter signed by Colonel Rogers and all the training participants. The letter expressed gratitude for learning a lot thanks to Shunsuke, filled with words of appreciation for realizing what true military spirit and true sacrifice meant. At the end of the letter, Jessica's personal message was written separately. To Mr. Shunsuke, you taught me the most important lesson. Thank you for teaching me what humility is and what true strength is. I always respect you. Shunsuke read the letter and smiled gently. The memories of that time returned. At first, He was truly angry. Especially Jessica's insulting words were unbearable. But by enduring, he realized that trying to understand rather than getting angry was a greater strength. Forgiving rather than retaliating was the act of a stronger person. And above all, he learned that true victory is not about defeating others, but about mutual recognition and growing together. A year later, Shunsuke was to participate in another international joint training. This time, it was not a punishment, but an honor. As he left for the airport, his colleagues saw him off. This time, he would reveal his true identity from the beginning. "It's more interesting to show it slowly," one of his colleagues said, half joking, half serious. Shunsuke laughed and replied, "It's more fun to show it slowly." But it was different now. He had the confidence that he wouldn't get angry even if he were ignored like before. Rather, he knew he could learn more through such experiences. As the plane took off, Shunsuke looked down at the blue sea outside the window. The sea truly connected all places. The Sea of Japan and the Sea of America, and all the seas of the world, were connected as one. Human hearts were the same. Even if they used different countries, different cultures, and different languages, ultimately, they could connect with the same heart. This was true strength. Not defeating others, but defeating oneself. Not fighting, but enduring and understanding. Not being superior alone, but growing together. And above all, not giving up even if you seem weak. Going your own way until the end, even if you seem small. This was the meaning of true strength that Shunsuke learned. And this is an important lesson we should all remember. Appearance is not everything. What is truly important is the true self hidden in the heart. Do not judge someone too easily. That person may have stories and experiences hidden within them that you cannot imagine. And remember, truly strong people are not those who shout loudly. They are those who quietly and diligently do what they must. They have hearts as deep as the sea and as vast as the sea. Thank you for watching today's story. Please let us know where you are watching this video from in the comments. We aim to be a channel that talks with our viewers. Thank you.